Welcome to the Share the Wealth Show, where minority professionals can learn to escape the racial wealth gap and catapult themselves into abundance. Your host, Nicole Pendergrass, grew her net worth from being negative to multiple six figures. Join her on her investigative mission to expose secret strategies of the wealthy so we can all have the tools needed to build the life and legacy we were created to possess. Now it's time for the show.
What are the biggest myths about trust funds that hold Black and brown families back?
So I don't know if you know about my passion project, but I have a club on Clubhouse as well as a TikTok channel that is the Black Trust Fund Kids. And so it's really normalizing intergenerational wealth transfer in Black and brown communities because we should all want to be Black Trust Fund Kids, right? It's important. What it means is that somebody has planned for you. It's not this idea that we have in our head about trust fund babies, right? The thing that the media has presented is like these spoiled brats driving these like incredibly insane cars and like living in mansions and they've got billions of dollars. And we immediately say, that's not us. I don't have that much money. That like trust fund's not for me. That is false. That is a media portrayal that says to us about, you know, why we shouldn't believe that that's what we want or need or deserve. But everybody should be a trust fund kid. Because what it means is that somebody, planned for you, right? Planned for how wealth is going to be protected and preserved for you. It means that they have planned to keep you out of a court battle, right? They've decided that when they die, you're not going to have to go through probate court to get those assets transferred to you. They've decided we're going to minimize taxes, right? On whatever these transfers are. None of those things have anything to do with being a spoiled brat. Now, inside of your trust, you can say all kinds of things. You can have it so that the assets are distributed outright, which, you know, is not necessarily recommended because typically assets are squandered after receipt in our community, about 3 to 5 years after receipt. And so that's not helpful for building generational wealth, right? You could stagger the distributions at certain ages, but you'll lose some of the benefits of creditor protection, of divorce protection, and also control over those assets. So maybe not that will work for you. Depends on your circumstances. My personal favorite is a multi-generational trust structure or a legacy trust, where my trust creates a sub-trust for my son, who's 4, right? And from that perspective, I get to say who manages it until he reaches a certain age. And in my trust at this point, it's 35. I need him to get to 35. I need him to get over the fact that I'm no longer here. I need him to have enough maturity to be able to appropriately manage it. I need him to have learned some things, right? Had some life experiences, paid some bills on his own before he starts managing what I've got going. But I also put in some other restrictions, like he has to successfully complete a financial literacy course. I don't know what the financial markets are going to look like by the time he's 35. He's 4, right? Bitcoin is at $40,000 a coin. 12 years ago, nobody knew what Bitcoin was. So like, I have zero idea what the financial markets would look like. And I don't have to know because I'll be dead. But he has to know because he'll be the one managing it. And how do I ensure that he will know? I make it a requirement. And I say, hey, you have to take a course that's going to teach you about how the markets are working today so that you understand, and not just take it, successfully complete it. That is a term, that is a condition of my trust, but so that you can understand how to manage what I've left you, right? Because not just what to do with it, but how to deal with it and how to continue to build it. I've also put restrictions on sale. Can't sell my real estate unless it's for another piece of real estate with a higher return on investment. You've got to do that calculation. And because for me, I believe that real estate is an important part of an investment portfolio. We are not making any more dirt. It is constantly increasing in value, and people always need a place to live. It's also an asset that you can continue to leverage over and over and over again. One piece of property can create generational wealth in one family, generation after generation after generation, if it's properly protected and leveraged. So he can't sell it, but I gave him a formula. I say, but you can take money out of it. You can refinance it up to 75% of the fair rental value. So if you can get $2,000 a month on that property, your mortgage cannot be more than 75% of that on a monthly basis. That's how you take out money every 15 years to be able to fund businesses, education, other real estate without putting the property underwater. So I've restricted him, but then I've given him a formula to use that property so that he can't squander it. Even if he wanted to, because he's not allowed to sell it, he can't do it, right? And so when you set in those parameters, you are protecting what the assets are inside the portfolio. When I think about, the stocks and things of that nature, again, I don't want you to sell anything, but you can take a portfolio loan, but you can't take a portfolio loan that's more than this. Why do I want him to take loans versus sell the assets? Taxes. You sell that house, you've got to pay capital gains on that house. You take a mortgage on that house or you refinance it. Guess what? That is tax-free. So now it's tax-free money that a tenant is paying back that you just went to use to buy other assets that you can take out money from tax-free, and then somebody else pays back, and it just perpetuates, right? So from that perspective, but it's in my plan. So comprehensive planning, it's in my plan. Should he pass away and have children, my plan will continue. My plan will continue for his children directly. It bypasses any spouse. So it would go to his children directly with the same parameters that I've put in for him. They will have to be 35. They will have to take a financial literacy course. They will be restricted on sale. All of these different pieces that we're talking about will continue generationally for not just my son, but my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. And so what I've done is created the perpetuation of wealth just by ensuring that the assets that I have stay with my family, right? That's it. So take it one step further. I also have life insurance, right? Because I know that if I die, someone's going to have to pay to care for my son. And that's my responsibility to ensure that there's money for him, right? My guardians that I've named in my estate plan are not planning and saving to send a kid they did not have to college, right? Or to pay for his education. So that's my job. So my life insurance pays into my trust. So then it is subject to all of these restrictions. So those dollars, right? Let's call it, $2 million. That goes into the trust, and then it's subject to whatever restrictions that's put on it. How he can spend it, what it can be used for. He cannot go out and buy a Maserati, but he can buy a reasonably priced car that will get him from A to B. He'll be responsible for his own insurance and gas. It is in my trust. It is specifically written down to make sure that A, there's enough to cover his basics. He will never not have food in his fridge. He will never not have a roof over his head. He will never not be able to afford medical care, right? But it's not enough that you can sit on the couch and do nothing. You have to keep working, because you could have that car, but if you don't have any insurance, you can't drive it, right? Like those kinds of things. There's also provisions that every new baby in my family that's born, so if he has children, my trust will buy his children life insurance. And so it just continues to ensure that every generation, every time somebody passes away, and by the way, my trust also already owns life insurance on my son. So every generation, when somebody passes away, that trust gets a reinfusion of cash to be able to be used for other things within our family. But there's a provision. Every baby born in my line will have a life insurance policy that comes off of my trust. And because whole life insurance policies when they're babies are super cheap, right? Because you never have a longer life expectancy than when you are a newborn. They're cheap and easy to get. They have a longer time to cash compound, and you can borrow against them, right? Tax-free. And so, you're creating these banking concepts within your estate plan. So how do you plan for kids and keep them from being quote unquote trust fund kids? You restrict the heck out of it. But then you create a formula so that they can be successful and do whatever they want, right? The idea is to give you time for options. How creative, how innovative, what could you accomplish if your basics were covered? If you didn't have to worry about being on the street, how innovative could you be? Could you cure cancer? Maybe, if you don't have to worry about research funding, right? Could you get us to Mars? Probably. I mean, look at what Elon Musk is doing, right? If you did not have to take a job out of sheer necessity, and you could get out of this mindset and get into an abundance mindset, what couldn't you accomplish? And that's really what it means to be a Black trust fund kid, right? Not this media portrayal of spoiled brats, and that might be in some circumstances, right? But it's not really what it means when we say it. It's about creating opportunities and access for us to thrive.
Looking to build wealth with real estate? Are you all tapped out on YouTube University and ready to get help tailored to your specific situation and goals? Have you always known that you are a little different from the crowd, that you never liked following the status quo, and that you're just tired of living in mediocrity? You want to build wealth on your own terms outside of Wall Street? Well, then maybe the Microfamily Mavericks mentorship program can help with that. It's a community where I handhold you through the process of buying your first small commercial multifamily building, because not everyone is ready for 100 units out the gate. Why multifamily? Because it gives your rental income a hedge against vacancy. Imagine what happens when your single family rental tenant leaves, right? And why commercial 5+ units? Because you have much more control over increasing the building's value in the commercial space, and then in turn, increasing your own net worth. Starting small is a stepping stone to so much more, because then you can tap that equity and buy another building and another and another, and you get the point. So increasing your cash flow and your ability to be job optional along the way. It's all a part of the journey. So if you think big, but you want to start small, and if you know multifamily real estate is a way for you to open the door to building a life of freedom, abundance, and legacy, but you just need someone to guide you step by step, and you want to be surrounded by other people on the same journey, doing the same thing, then just click the link in the show notes to find out a little bit more about the Microfamily Mavericks, and I look forward to potentially seeing you on the inside. So now back to the show. How can we use estate planning to protect future generations from financial hardships and systemic barriers?
Like my goal is to make sure that everybody who comes down the line from me is taken care of, right? At least to not have to worry about going to get a higher education, without having to worry about whether or not they can get a medical treatment, without having to worry about whether or not they can get seed money to start a business or any of these other things. So they can remove themselves from this toxic and abusive banking society that we live in right now that is harmful against people of color, as we have seen most recently with Wells Fargo and the refinance rates in 2020. Yeah. But, so that they can create their own banking economy within our own family. And if I want to make sure that continues, because it's got to make it past his generation to be able to continue, he can't screw it up. Yeah. So if you don't do the steps that I've outlined to make sure that you at least have a baseline knowledge for how to handle this, then you just don't get to. Yeah. And that's my choice, right? When our kids are minors, it is incredibly important to make sure that we are far more conservative in our planning, because we have no idea who they will be as people. We have no idea what they'll be exposed to. We have no idea how well they will process this information, who might be in their ear and guiding them down a wrong path. We just don't know any of those things, right? Because they're babies. And so we get far more restrictive with their planning in the beginning. Because if I die tomorrow, this plan is what's left, right? Yeah. This is the only thing that's left. Yeah. I'm not here. Yes, you can't take it with you, right? Like that's true, but I can use it to guide him. I can use it to say, here are the things that I value. So if he graduates top of his class from high school, he gets a certain amount of money unrestricted to do whatever he wants with. And I've got a provision in there that says, hey, or, a line in there that says, I think you should travel because it's an important part of a young person's education and like worldview, right? Like, yeah. You can do whatever you want. If he gets a full ride to college, right? My estate just got a boom, assuming he goes to a 4-year university. So every semester, as long as he's keeping that scholarship, he'll get a certain sum of money to do whatever he wants with. My recommendation is to go, put a down payment on a piece of property and rent it out to his college friends. But that's on him, right? Because there's other stuff in the estate that's still going to be there. This is your money to do whatever you want with. That's me showing my values. That's me saying to you, I'm proud of you. That's me saying I've not only thought about you, but that I love you and I am encouraging you. And the only way I can do that is with my estate because I'm gone. If I'm there for high school and college, right, which I hope, but assuming I'm there for that, then I get an idea of who he is as a person. How serious are you? Is this something that you have an aptitude for? Is this something you're even interested in? And then I can amend my plan accordingly. Maybe he's incredibly talented in financial understanding, right? And maybe he's great at real estate and like he understands how all of this stuff works. And at a young age, I'm like, ooh, at 20, you could totally handle this. I can amend my estate plan and bring it down and make it less restrictive, right? Because I'm like, I know you get it. Or I could be like, you are a hot mess and I will never, ever. And I will just remove him entirely from being able to be a trustee, right? And I'll set like a professional trustee to come in and manage it. So it's amendable while you are alive and have capacity. And so as your life changes, you'll change that. What many people, at least of our generation, need to realize, and particularly our parents, right, is that we have more complicated family structures than are accounted for under the law. And we've had the issues of, the unequal distribution of the GI Bill. We've seen redlining. We've seen all of these things that have been impediments to our wealth that have resulted in about 43% of African-American families owning their own homes, which is incredibly low compared to our contemporaries. And it's becoming increasingly more difficult to do so. So we need to look at, our parents and our grandparents who own these homes and make sure that they have trusts in place to protect it. We also need to keep in mind that the 90s and the war on drugs was really a war on Black and Brown communities, particularly impoverished communities, right? Where we saw this over-policing happening. And people who have been touched by the war on drugs typically have either restitution issues or they're still incarcerated or they have substance abuse issues. And those types of things, if someone's got a judgment against them, the state can come in and attach to grandma's house and force a sale. And now you've lost your asset.
What are the financial consequences of not having an estate plan in place?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar. The road to 2053. Have you heard about that?
Is that the year that we're supposed to have like zero net worth?
Yes. So the median net worth for Black families was set to hit zero by 2053. That was a study that came out in 2017. Now, 2020 happened. And the implication of that is that 1 in 555 African Americans died as a result of COVID-19, which has severely accelerated this timeline in just 2020 alone. But it's severely accelerated this timeline to the road to zero wealth. And so what was, 14 years from now, or 20 something years from now is probably about 10 years of we have to get people covered. 70% of African Americans do not have any estate planning at all. Any. not a power of attorney, not a will, not a nair, nothing. And so we end up in probate court, which is costing families in the United States $2 billion annually. $2 billion in an avoidable process, right? Wow. And so we have to do something. And I know we talked a little bit about minor kids, but just between April of 2020 and June of 2021, more than 146,000 children were orphaned as a result of COVID-19. In fact, 1 in 4 of the deaths from COVID-19 resulted in an orphaned person. And 65% of those orphaned children are in minority communities. So if we don't have estate plans and we don't have guardianship elections for our kids, we are literally putting the state and the court in charge of our family, our finances, our minor kids. And then they get to decide who raises our kids. They get to decide who manages their money. And if you're thinking about the members of your family and who may or may not be good for that, I would be worried, right? They get to decide what happens with our stuff because we haven't said. And so the numbers don't lie. In 2017, there was another study that was done that found that only 13% of college-educated African Americans are getting $10,000 or more to the next generation. So if we say that differently, 87% of college-educated African Americans are not even getting $10,000 to the next generation. And that is not because we don't have stuff. And it is not because we are not building assets and estates. It is not because of that. It's because we are losing at the generational wealth transfer game. We are losing every time somebody gets sick and every time somebody passes away by not having plans in place. And we just cannot afford to do so anymore.
What's the first step to building generational wealth with a trust?
And so when we talk about when should someone get started, everybody needs an estate plan at 18. I don't care how much money you have, because an estate plan is not just what happens when you die. It's also what happens if you get sick, what happens if you're in a car accident, what happens if you get shot, what happens if you are not around to make decisions for yourself, if you're in a coma, if you have a heart attack, you have a stroke, dementia, all things that are on the rise in the Black community, particularly in younger ages. What happens to your family if that happens to you? Well, most people don't realize that nobody's legally allowed to step up and take care of you. You have to ask a judge for permission. It's called a conservatorship or a guardianship proceeding, depending on where you live. And so when we think about estate planning, it's not just about how much money you have. That's not the barometer. If you're 18, there is some form of estate planning that you need. It's just not going to be the same one that I need or that you need or that the person down the street needs. Everybody's estate plan is customized to their situation. But if you're over the age of 18, you have to have at least the minimum.
Are you enjoying this episode? Then stop what you're doing right now. Head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It really helps our show get pushed to more people who are looking for the information that we're sharing here. We have to share the wealth. If you listen to us on YouTube, make sure you like the episode that you're listening to right now and subscribe to our channel. Then share the channel with somebody else. There are people out there looking for the information you're listening to right now, so make sure you share it with someone who you know needs it. Now, back to the show. What are some of the biggest mindset shifts people need to make when starting their wealth building journey?
Okay. Yeah, here's the thing. Wealth building does not happen overnight.
Yes.
It does not. In our space, this is really for anybody that's just getting started in multifamily. Be patient in what it is that you're doing. This Gino says it all the time. In real estate is a get rich slow plan. And, the thing about it is you just got to get started. You just have to get started. And as it relates to structuring things, start small. Maybe you start with a will and then you transition into a trust, and then you transition into a dynasty trust. Just putting in the work to start thinking about estate planning and future generations, it feeds on itself. You will want to be better and better and better. You will look for more opportunities to improve your overall estate. So just get started.
If someone is new to estate planning, what key steps would you recommend they take first?
I actually went to an estate attorney, and we had 3 or 4 meetings where the first thing was he gave me this huge worksheet of just questions. And like my wife and I had to go through those. And, then you have to define all of your assets. Then you have to define, how you want distributions work. Then you have to define provisions. So it's a process. Like make no mistake about it. But it's something that I feel, even if you don't have a whole lot of money, eventually it's important, because it's the only true way that you can establish something that'll grow for your future heirs over time.
Yeah,
it's the only way. So at least, and here's the other thing too. Without some type of trust in place, depending on the state you're in, 3 to 8% of your trust is gonna be gone in probate, and just taxes and fees associated with probate, just right off the top. Then there's going to be taxes so far as the transfer is concerned too. So what a dynasty trust allows you to do is to define, the trust in a way where you can sidestep, generational tax. Now, granted, distributions come as income, and that's a whole nother thing. Oh, by the way, none of this is financial advice. Please contact a qualified financial advisor, contact an estate professional. I'm just telling you what I've done. So, this is not something that you just want to, look at some YouTube videos and try to do. You need legal help in order to establish that. Now, Mine is actually established in California, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. But there are other states. Typically, the way these dynasty trusts work, they don't go on in perpetuity. Meaning, here in California, it's 20 years after the passing of your youngest descendant is the way it works. So, let's say my wife and I are gone at that point, and let's just say my granddaughter has a child. So it's going to be 20 years after my great grandchild passes, the trust itself gets dissolved. But I've also structured in the trust, and I encourage everybody to do this because my buddy told me that his grandfather did this. His grandfather actually shot a video, Brewster's Millions style, where he talked to future generations.
That's what I wanted to do too.
About why he set the trust up, the intent, and what his expectations were going forward. Yeah. So I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. So the way, and there's a letter in my trust too. What I'm hoping is that my future heirs, after we're long gone, will actually create another trust.
What are some key differences between a standard trust and a dynasty trust?
For me, this is the gift. My parents have a trust. They don't have a dynasty trust set up the way I do. But that's okay. My parents don't want to, you mentioned the work. They didn't want to go through all of the headaches. So it's just, it's kind of a straight line. But it works for them. So everybody has to do what works for them. My goal is generational wealth, period. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes now to make sure that happens. Oh, one thing too, by the way, I'm probably going to have to establish another trust in the next few years. There's a limit on dynasty trust. I think it's like $11.5 million right now. Before you start encountering, I think it's GSTT, basically the tax to descendants.
The gift tax,
change.
Right? The
gift
inheritance
tax,
or gift tax.
Yep. So
I didn't know that trusts were subject to that.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing: if the way the trust is structured, I think it's the term for it is it's like generational skipping. There's no requirement that the trusts have to skip generations. But the thing about it is you want to make sure you're able to bypass gift tax, estate tax, in order to make sure that your descendants get the most that they possibly can. And like I said, I think in 2020, it was like 11.5 million. I think it's going to go up with inflation, but it's just something to keep in mind. And that's part of the reason why, like I said, when we get to that point, then I'll be looking at some other options, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Oh my God. I could talk to you forever. It's already, this episode I already know is going to get cut in half because this is okay. Too long. But
for me, this is the gift. My parents have a trust. They don't have a dynasty trust set up the way I do. But that's okay. My parents don't want to, you mentioned the work. They didn't want to go through all of the headaches. So it's just, it's kind of a straight line. But it works for them. So everybody has to do what works for them. My goal is generational wealth, period. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes now to make sure that happens.
What do you think stops most people from setting up a trust, and how can they overcome those barriers?
Our community traditionally does not do a very good job at estate planning. Part of it is because, a lot of folks in our community don't have a whole lot. But the thing about it is I've had folks in my family pass away where that part of the family couldn't even afford to bury them. So they're collecting money from the family. So I say all that to say this. I learned from all of these things. And I worked with a guy who his grandfather was the governor of Utah back in the 70s. This guy was, I don't know why he worked. Well, I understand why he works now, but I didn't before. He's worth like $50 million. Like, to have a W-2 job and be worth $50 million. I didn't understand at the time, but I understand now. He needed something to do. But he walked me through, like, his family had a family office set up in Utah. He lived here. And he walked me through how his grandfather established a dynasty trust. And I'll talk about what that actually is in a second. But that dynasty trust was set up in Utah and structured such that every descendant received a distribution, a quarterly distribution, but there were all of these provisions in place. If you worked and made 75% of median income, you got X amount. If you made 100% of median income, you got X amount. If you didn't work at all, you got the minimum. If you were disabled, you got max distributions. So he walked me through, like, if you wanted to start a business, you could get a loan from the trust. If you went to college, the trust would actually pay for your college. If you finish, if you didn't, your college loans would be deducted from your future distributions. So the way it was structured was phenomenal. And as soon as I saw it, I'm like, if you want to buy a house, another example, the trust would actually give you the down payment for your house. So, and also what was really interesting was his trust, I think back in the 70s when he started, it was like $50 million and it grew to like 300 million or some astronomical number. But the way they structured their trust was only 35% of the total profits from the trust that the trust generated on an annual basis was actually distributed. 65% went back into the trust itself to accumulate additional assets. So that's how they were able to grow it year after year after year. And like I said, once it got to, if you're talking about, $50 million, $100 million, you can establish a family office at that point and hire like professional, like professional fund managers to actually deploy that capital to the folks in your family. Like I said, once he laid it out, I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. And what I really appreciated about it was, you have a lot of people that, they end up with sizable estates and they give their heirs the entire estate at their passing. And what happens is you create these trust fund babies that have no real appreciation as to what it takes to actually build an estate that size. So they squander the money. So I wanted to make sure that what my wife and I are able to leave to our descendants, that it grows over time. So such that we're able to generate generational wealth. And my goal, and part of the reason I still work a W-2, my goal is I don't want my grandchildren to have to work a W-2 unless they want to.
Oh my God.
Did you love this episode of Share the Wealth Show? Be sure to connect with Nicole by following her on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. If you picked up any of the gems that were dropped by today's guest, make sure you not only put them in your bag, but if you know of someone who would benefit from this information, don't keep it to yourself. Share the wealth and make sure to leave us a rating and review. We'll see you for next week's episode. Subscribe so you'll be notified.